Shana Tovat, everyone. Happy New Year. Everyone should have a Gemar Chesima Tova being sealed in the book of life. So we are in the holiday season, the high holiday season, which can truly be appreciated when you understand the mystical and the spiritual dimension of it, which is that just like a human body, we have a central nervous system, which is the head, through which controls and governs all the faculties of the human body and all the organs and all their movements. So too, Rosh Hashanah is called Rosh, a head. It's not called Tchilat Hashanah, which would mean the beginning of the year. It means the head of the year. So in addition to the beginning, it's also a central nervous system. Because time is energy, and just like every form of energy has its source, so though energy flows through our entire body, yet you could identify certain areas and isolate certain areas where the energy comes from. So though none of us have ever seen a soul, but clearly the soul manifests in the brain. Without a brain, a human being can't live. Without a heart, a human being can't live. Without certain vital organs, a human being can't live. So though, God forbid, one can live with compromised or diminished faculties in other areas, there are clearly faculties that are vital, meaning without that, the life force will not flow through the body. So the head is obviously a key one, which is why any damage, God forbid, to the brain, to the mind, has damage not just in the brain, it has damage all across the board. A stroke, which diminishes the flow or impedes the flow of blood to the brain, will affect different parts of the body, because the brain is a fundamental conduit of life energy. Without getting into now the medical and philosophical discussion on the matter, but clearly it's a force like that. So the same is true with time. Time is energy. So the energy that flows into the entire year, see the year as being components or parts and organs and faculties of the body of time. So the head of that, the energy flow, begins from Rosh Hashanah. And the place is actually that Yom Kippur is actually called Rosh Hashanah in Tanakh. So Yom Kippur is a form of Rosh Hashanah, and that's why the prayers are very similar. Actually, they punctuate what we call the 10 days of Tshuva. Rosh Hashanah being the first day of the year, Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the year, and they complete a cycle of 10 and 7 days in between them. So you have a cycle of 7 and 10, and Yom Kippur is the conclusion of what began Rosh Hashanah. And Sukkot, the holiday that follows Yom Kippur, is like the celebration that comes and reveals that which the experience of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are all about. So if we did Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur correctly, it wouldn't just be sitting in a synagogue and praying lip service or out of guilt and superstition. It would be actually a profound spiritual experience of literally going back to one's own source. Just like, let's say, a business has an annual meeting where they meet and they determine what the goals will be for the coming year, and they set the course, and that's when they hire and recruit. In a way, Rosh Hashanah is like a spiritual annual gathering, and what it's meant to be is really getting back to the source of why are we here on this earth. So the big questions of life: what's my purpose? Why am I here? What am I doing with my life? Why am I caught up in the details and minutiae, or am I focusing on what really matters? That's what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are truly about. And that's why it's called in many prayers a word that is very foreign to us. And many people have problem actually with this word. You hear the word Malchus all the time. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we call Melech HaMishpat, God the King, crowning the God as King. Rosh Hashanah is about blowing the shofar. King, again, King, King, King. What is this meaning of God as being King? Melech, Malchus. So the truth is that if you interpret it correctly, Melech really means dignity. The dignity of a human being, the essential dignity of a human being, is this fact that we are indispensable. And that comes from a Torah point of view by virtue of our being created in the divine image. Take away a divine element from a human being, we could be then rendered negligible, dispensable, and meaningless. No, they say that when we wake up in the morning, we kill approximately 100,000 bacteria as we get out of bed. Because bacteria are all over the place, and when you get out of bed, you're just killing them all over. But who cries over that? Bacteria. First of all, they're invisible. Second of all, there's so many of them, they don't make any difference. This is called being negligible, where no one cares. Nothing, it doesn't matter. The truth is, from a Torah point of view, every detail of existence matters, and I've told the story many times with one of the Rabbis when he was a young child. His father, they took a walk in the woods, in a garden, and his son, the little boy, ripped off a leaf from the tree and began rubbing it for no particular reason. So his father reprimanded him and said, "What right do you have to rub and destroy and mutilate a vulnerable, a defenseless leaf? Just a leaf. How many leaves are there in this world?" And you think, what's the big thing? But in Judaism, everything has a divine element which makes it sacred. That's called dignity. And when someone assaults your dignity or violates your dignity is when they take away that type of value. When a child is abused, when someone is yelled at, when someone is demoralized, that is abuse of malchus of a human being. So in Rosh Hashanah, what we do is declare, it's not just God as king, it's declaring the dignity of God and the dignity of each of us being created in the image of God. Because remember, Rosh Hashanah, besides declaring God as the sovereign power, we also know it's the birthday of the human race. That's when Adam and Eve were created. So what's the relationship with one to the next? If you talk about creation, if you talk about crowning God as king, God began 6 days earlier. He created the universe 6 days earlier. It's not because God doesn't need to be crowned. What is God? Anyone that has any even ostensible understanding of spirituality knows that God is not a principle in heaven or some type of man-made creation that needs to be crowned, that needs to be glorified. It's really about glorifying life. If life is to be sacred, we have to have a dimension of it that is beyond us. And that's the true meaning of a God. A God means something, a force that is not man-made, that it's not given to you by someone and then can be taken from you. And interestingly, the founding fathers in their wisdom understood this. They came to it through a negative way because they saw the abuse, religious abuse, and the abuse of people's personal rights. So they declared the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. We would say, well, people are created equal, and they base it on the fact that because each of us was created. Created is the word they use. Though there's separation of church and state, created by what? By a God, as they put it, a divine. Each one of us is endowed with inalienable rights that no one can take away from us. Because they understood that if you're going to create guaranteed freedoms, it cannot be man endows it to us. It has to be given to us by something, a force that's beyond us all. Now, the founding fathers were not particularly religious people. They were deists. Some were actually, like Thomas Paine, did not consider themselves even believers. But for them, God was not what we call God today, whatever the stereotype or the parody that God is. For them, God was the idea that it's not man. It's not man-made. So not King George, and not the Emperor Louis, and not Tsar Nicholas or Alexander. Nobody can give us rights, and therefore no one can take from us these rights. In this sense, we're completely equal. Now this, for a Jew, this is like obvious fact, because the Torah says that. But in history, in the world, this was not a fact until 300 years ago. Simply not a fact. There were no governments in the world. There was no sovereign state that was run by this type of basis, that there's individual rights that are sacred. So Rosh Hashanah is really the birth of that message, that there's individual rights are sacred, and that's what's called Malchus. And these days we build Malchus, we build the structure of Malchus, we build Malchus because, as the Kabbalists explain, and as I discussed last week, and I'm going to elaborate more now, is that the spiritual genome, the DNA of a human being is made up not just of the physical DNA that we know of, but also spiritual DNA, and Malchus is a key component because it's the essence of dignity. But dignity alone is not sufficient. To have a full dimensional structure of a human being, you need to have what we call the 10 faculties, or the 10 spheres, the 10 spheres. And they are, as I discussed last week at length, these are the conscious faculties. They go from Chokhmah through Malchus, Chokhmah being wisdom, the concept of an idea, Bina is the comprehension, Das is the conclusion, the resonance, the conviction, you can say, the final picture. And then come 7 emotional spheres, going from love through discipline. Compassion endurance, humility or yielding, bonding, and dignity. So when we say that now is Binyan HaMalchus, it's called the building of the structure of Malchus, the building of dignity, as it's explained, and I make it a little palatable and explainable in the book 60 Days, is that each of these 10 days of tshuva, starting from Rosh Hashanah, going and ending in Yom Kippur, build another one of the 10 spheres of dignity. The wisdom of dignity, the understanding of it, the das of it, the love of it, and so on. So each component is like in anything in life, we know everything is, we call hiskalulus. Is it called interconnectivity? Things are not one-dimensional. If someone will say, well, are you emotional or you're intellectual? The answer is there's always a combination of both. So if you want to dissect it on a more theoretical level, you could speak about them as separate components. But if someone looks at a human being, are we more similar or are we more different? The truth is we're much more similar than we are different as human beings. But the configuration, the combination of our personalities is what makes us unique. It's not that one person has wisdom, another person has none of it. It's how wisdom works and how it interacts with the other faculties. So the human body is very similar. We all have the same organs, we all have the same structure. But the combination, the configurations of how they all mix together is the key thing. So when you talk about chromosomes and DNA and genetics, even the difference between masculine and feminine is just a matter of an X and Y chromosome. But that's the difference between being male or female. And that's a fundamental difference. But it's all about how they all mix together. So everything has everything within it. This is called in Hasidic terminology or Kabbalistic terminology, hiskalus. Hiskalus means where there's a configuration, an interconnected configuration, what we would call today a network. Then there's a thing called hischalkus. Hischalkus means a structure that is diverse. A diverse, or you can say a diverse or a differentiated structure where everything is in its place. That's called hischalkus. Hischalkus, when all those pieces come together, what we would call harmony within diversity. So you can have one unit. One unit can be, let's say, the color blue, the color red. Or you could have your eyes and your ears. And then you could have how they are distinct. There's two units. So that's hischalkus, there's distinction, where each unit is functioning in its particular way. And then there's hiskalus, where they work together in a symbiotic way, and that's called hiskalus, which means that they are now networking with each other. They each give and take. And then you have a healthy structure. So in a way, when the Torah talks about creation, it talks about day one, let there be light. In day one, it says, the Medrash says, Echad, it was unity prevailed. There were no multi-dimensions. Even though it says in the beginning God created heaven and earth, but as Rashi explains, the entire world was like in a seed. And Bereshis included all the diversity that would be created, but then it was like in a seed, all included in a concentrated form. And each day, that part of the seed emerged. So then you have day 2 created hischalkus. Now we have day 2 is level 2. That's why the Medrash says every day it says Vayar Elokim, that God saw that this was day 1. So day 1 doesn't say Yom Rishon, like Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. It should have said Yom Rishon, the first day, the second day, the third day. It says Yom Echad, because the first day was unity. Second day is now second day, third day. So now the second day was the creation of diversity. You have therefore the split between the upper waters and the lower waters, heaven and earth, the upper heavens and the lower ones. And then day 3, you have Huchpal by Kitoiv. It says that in day 2 we don't say God does not say it was good, because he could not say it was good once he saw there was diversity, because diversity has the potential, like the Medrash also says, that that day the Machlekes was created. Divisiveness. Diversity is very healthy, but diversity also has the potential for divisiveness. Day 3, when vegetation was created, there was the creation of hiskalus, what we would call shalom, peace. In Judaism, peace is not the absence of pieces. Let's put it this way. Peace, as in P-E-A-C, is not the absence of P-I-E-C-E. But peace is not the absence of war. Peace is a state of being of its own. It's fulfillment. Shalom comes from the word shalom, also complete, fulfilled, and many other meanings in it. So shalom is more than the absence of peace. Shalom is creating harmony within diversity. So day 3, Medrash says, that's where God says twice today was good. Because today, the good for day 3 and the good for day 2, recognizing the diversity of day 2, led to the harmony of day 3. Or, unfortunately, tragically, it could also lead to the destruction, it could lead to war. So day 1, you have no potential for war. Day 2, you have potential for divisiveness. Day 3, you find the harmony, the hiskalos. So in Kabbalistic terminology, you have the idea of, let's say, echad, oneness, then hischalkus, 2, and 3 is the symbol of harmony, hiskalos. We say it every morning in the prayer. We say that in the rules and the methodology of how to study Torah, it says, Shnei ksuvim achishim zeh zeh, 2 verses that contradict one another. Uba kosav ashlishi comes the 3rd verse, ubachriya b'neim. Machriya. Machriya is like creating peace. It reconciles between them. This does not mean that it takes a side. It's not 2 against 1. It finds the common denominator between 2 diverse verses and shows how they don't contradict, and each one contributes their particular message. And that's the true symbiosis of existence, of nature, of the human body. Diversity that is working in harmony. If, God forbid, all our cells would suddenly begin to melt away their diversity and become one, we'd have destruction. The beauty is that it's diverse, each doing its function, yet there's like a conductor that's bringing them all together and is playing one melody, one music. That's a healthy human being. Autoimmune diseases, or any disease where the body turns on itself, is an example of where you're lacking that type of hiskalos. So as we were discussing last week, I want to continue this discussion, this part 2, understanding the inner structure of who we are is obviously the key to understanding our behavior, our lives, what we can do about our lives, where things are working, where things aren't working. No one needs explanation when it comes to the medical level, that if you want to understand yourself, you need to know what makes you function. So when things are going well, obviously everything is, people take for granted their blessings. But the idea of understanding how we function is the key to when there's a problem, or how to maintain health, or how to preempt illness and disease. The key is to understanding what makes the body function. And that's not a simple question or answer, because the body may have many, many components, and you can't just say what makes it function. Now, a lot of things make it function. It needs oxygen, it needs food, it needs drink, it needs vitamins, it needs all kinds of different minerals. And it needs it at different times, and it needs it in the right balance. And when there's a deficiency in one, it needs to be compensated for, and so on. Then there's, of course, dealing with infection, and dealing with disease, and so on. And then we have a whole immune system that fights these forces. So literally equally, there's also, as the Rambam says, there's chayli haguf and there's chayli hanefesh. Just like there are illnesses of the body, there are illnesses of the soul, of the spirit, of the psyche. What they call today psychology, the study of the psyche. And there too, to really appreciate and to be the healthiest one can be, and to live up to our greatest potential. And at the same time also to prevent or preempt disease on that level, psychological challenges. There's also, the key is to understanding yourself, understanding that your psyche and your soul is made up of components. So last week I laid out somewhat the map that I just now summed up as well, of the 10 spheres, the conscious genome, which means that these 10 spheres, as they interact with each other, is what shapes and defines who we are. So if you wanted to get a diagnosis of where you are psychologically and emotionally, the first step is to understand what your chachma is like, your bina, your das, your chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, chayid, yesod, malchus. And that's a painstaking process. That's why we have 10 days of tshuva. Each day focusing on one of those and simply knowing where do you stand. And not just from 1 to 10, but how strong is it, how weak is it, and so on. Until you don't get that type of diagnosis, it's very hard for a person to say, okay, how do I solve my problems? It's very hard to solve a problem in general terms. It would be like coming to the doctor and saying, look, something hurts. And he says, well, what hurts? And you say, I don't know, just everything hurts. That's not that. You'll never solve problems like that. Divide and conquer. You have to isolate and identify a particular area that is the problem. And then you work your way backwards and try to identify and isolate, and in process of elimination, what could be the root, the cause of that particular problem. Now, of course, we can have a pain in one part of our bodies and the root is elsewhere altogether. But that's why a trained eye is able to trace and identify these forces. And the same, and even more complicated, is the spiritual genome. Understanding those factors and how they interact with each other. But if you want to have any understanding of yourself, and especially if you want to grow and deal with any of your challenges, whether it's fears we have, whether it's blocks that we don't know where they're coming from, whether it's just our own upbringing trapped in our past and in our comfort zone, or the pressures that are placed upon us by other people's expectations. The list goes on. Whatever it may be, there's not just the isolating the problem, it's also understanding why is it impacting you. Why, for example, some people, some of the issues I just described, they've been able to handle. They don't really, not affected by other people's expectations, for example, as much. Because each of us has a different makeup. Each of us has a different profile. So one has to really understand the details of that profile. And that would be, obviously, in my opinion, would be one of the greatest contributions we can make, would be to actually map that spiritual genome so people could have a blueprint by which to follow and understand themselves. And literally become soul doctors, and have soul doctors who can help us identify, isolate, and then intervene in each particular area to figure out what's going on in our spiritual structure. But in addition to the conscious, just to make the plot thicken, there's also the unconscious, which is what I was going to discuss today. But I want to begin with a preface. Jewish thought, based on a medrash, which is based, of course, on the Torah itself, on the Bible. There are 5 different names that are used throughout the Torah when you talk about spirit and psyche. So to just say, for example, we have a soul within us, is very general as well. That too has to be broken down in understanding who we are. And the 5 different names given for it, as the medrash says, is nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. Generally, you could define them all as soul. But specifically, nefesh means a life force, ruach is a spirit, neshama is a soul, chaya is again life, and yechida, oneness. These are 5 dimensions of the soul. So let's talk about it for a moment in a more medical context. If someone were to ask, what does it mean to be alive? So a doctor, or anyone, a scientist, will tell you there's a medical definition for life. You know, when they declare somebody dead, God forbid, what determines that? So actually there is actually distinctions between the Torah definition of death and the secular medical definition. In the Torah, a key factor is breath. In medical definition, it's often the heart beating. The brain is still alive. You could have the heart has stopped and the brain is alive. So you could have there are different types of ways to define what life is about. You can have somebody that to the naked eye looks completely dead, in a comatose state, hypothermia, when in truth they are medically alive, and they can be brought back to life. So how do we define what life is? So the same is true when you talk about these 5 levels of soul. Nefesh is essentially the statement that they have biological life. Something can be alive, it could be moving, breathing, but it's the minimum, it's like the low burner. It's the minimum life force at work. Low burner of life. Which could also include somebody who's a vegetable, God forbid, in a hospital bed. A second level of life, ruach, is spirit, is that there's also an emotional element. The first type of person could say, I feel like a zombie, I don't feel anything. I'm alive, I know I'm breathing, I'm doing things, but emotionally I feel dead. People talk about that state. So ruach is an emotional life, where you feel things, you're stimulated, you're not numbed and deadened emotionally. You're excitable about things. The third level is neshama, which is intellectual life, which is essentially that there is not only emotional sensations, but there's also an intellectual. You are understanding things, you comprehend, you philosophize, you can abstract, you can analyze, and so on. These 3 that I just described are all conscious. These are conscious faculties, and how they break in the spheres goes like this. Chochmah Bina Das, the first of the 10, is neshama. The next of the 10, the next 3, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, that's ruach, spirit, emotions. And the last, and that's a Chayd Yesod Malchus, is essentially the last three or the last four are nefesh. They're basically action-based. So if you talk about, let's say, a human being developing from child, from fetus to adult, there's a maturing process. The maturing process begins from the bottom up. First with Malchus and Nihi. When you say in Kabbalah, you'd say someone has Moichin of Nihi, which means basically immature mind. The intellect is there, but it's still in a very childish state. It's the earliest stages of development. Then you develop emotionally, emotions begin to mature, and then comes the intellectual maturity, where a person grows into a full-blown adult. And these are the three stages of the genome, as they're mapped out on the conscious levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama. But then comes the question, what about the unconscious? What about that which we cannot directly identify? Which, for many of us, is the driving force of so much of what we do. There are things we can identify, we can trace what their root is. We could even trace it in our own past or in our own lives and so on. But then there's a whole two other dimensions, and this is called Chai and Chida, which are behind the curtain. They're not obvious, because they don't manifest in intellect, or in emotions, or in biology, in action. They remain two invisible forces. One is called the unconscious, and we'll call the other the unconscious. So Chaya, these are called in Kabbalistic and Hasidic terminology, makifim. If the first three that I just mentioned, which are the 10 faculties, are called pnimim, which means immanent, and I'll explain that in a moment, internalized energy, these last two are called makifim. Makifim means hovering, surrounding, encompassing. And let's use an example. Take an example in business. Someone has a vision. They want to build a certain type of business. The vision is based primarily by an objective, by some mission. Let's say the mission statement of Google is to organize all the information of the world and make it readily accessible. That's a vision, a mission. That line itself doesn't do anything. But without that line, the whole company is meaningless. So in many companies you'll find that people who are the vision people, there's the vision guy. The person who carries the vision, understands it well, makes sure that everything is aligned with the vision. And then they're the implementers. They're the action people, the people who execute and manifest that vision in a real, viable, functional infrastructure. You have a vision, you want to have a beautiful home. You may not even have a clue how do you build a home. That vision informs an architect, engineers, who will then draw blueprints, and in turn will hire all the contractors and the needed people, the craftsmen, to build for you the home you wish. Now you go to one of those craftsmen who may be an electrician or a plumber or a designer. They may not know your entire vision. They just need to know what they need to know in that component and that particular area of what they have to build. Moses and Bezalel were classic, vision and architect. Sometimes the CEO and the president, or the chief executive officer, chief operations officer. So when Moses began and told, what did he say? God says to him, build for me a temple and I will rest among them. Moses comes and says exactly that. He hires Bezalel, the architect. And he says, and that's how the Torah begins. He says, build first an ark and a menorah, a shulchan, a table. And the Talmud says that Bezalel, the architect, comes back to Moses and says to Moses, I don't understand. It's not the way of the world. The way of the world, you don't first build containers and then you build a structure. First you build a structure, a building, and then you bring the containers in there. If I go according to your plan, basically I'll build containers, where am I going to put them? And Moses rethought this and asked God, however different way that it's explained. Moses says, yes, Bezalel, that's your Batzal Kael, that you have the wisdom. What did Moses did not realize this? And he told them to build it that way, and that's how it was built. First they built the areas, first they built the tapestries, the structure, the walls, and then they built the containers. Moses was not practical enough to understand that, because Moses was a visionary. He knew the purpose of the Mishkan, not its walls. It's not its structure. It's the containers that you use on a daily basis where you serve, whether it's the Aron, the Holy Ark, or the menorah that was lit, or the offerings that are brought, or the Mizbeach, the altar upon which they brought offerings. But an architect works from the bottom up. He has to know how to implement. And implement is detail by detail. So a vision person and an implementer, an executor, are not often the same type of people. They're usually very different, actually, because their personality, one has a 30,000-foot view, and the other one is a ground-level view. And you need both in this universe for it to function properly. What the Kabbalah and Hasidus call this is called Makif and Pnimi. Makif is the vision. It's the overall vision, the overall desire for something you want. On that level, details are inconsequential, or they're only a means. And then there is Pnimim, where is the actual instruments. An artist has in his mind, or her mind, or an author, or a composer of music, a beautiful piece of art. In their heart and soul, it has not yet taken on shape and form. But they know what message they want to convey. Then comes step 2 of actually taking an easel and a paintbrush and a canvas and paint and beginning to express this particular structure, this particular piece of art. So everything begins with a vision which is a makif, an all-hovering, all-encompassing force. And then you have a pnimi, which is internalized and integrated energies, integrated circuits. So take the human body. We also have these two forces. On one hand, every part of the body is its particular paintbrush. It's its particular shape and color and hue and nuance. And very, very particular and very precise and very rigid, as a matter of fact. But then you have some type of invisible conductor, an invisible coordinating force. We call it the vision, the desire, the keser, the makif, that controls the whole thing and says, now work together, you're one human being. Work as one unit. Which in a way defies, and more importantly, transcends the distinctions of the levels here. So the same, going back now to the soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama are implementers. They're executors. They're the tools we use, whether it's intellectual tools, emotional tools, or action-based tools. And then there's the driving forces. There's the unconscious chaya. We'll call it the vision that is called makif akariv. That's a vision and a desire that is closer to the integrated circuits. And then you have yechida, which is makif harachik. It's more of a distant, removed vision. Because in vision itself, there are also two levels. One is just a vision, I want to have a beautiful home where I will live in. And it hasn't yet envisioned what kind of home that will be. It's just the desire for that piece of art. And then comes makif number 2, the closer one, where you start envisioning. And someone will say, okay, what do you think this home, what do you think this piece of art should look like? So you begin describing details, but you still have not implemented it. It's still not at the stage of actually spelling it out. So the level of chaya and yechida in Kabbalistic terminology is the state of keser, the crown that's above the 10 spheres, with the keser being divided by 2 parts, as the Kabbalah says. Arich and Atik. I'm just mentioning the names for those of you that want to know the details. Arich is what we call the Ratzon Klali, the general desire that already envisions the specifics of existence, of the structure, of the art, but it's not yet actually implementing and painting step by step. That comes in the next 10 spheres. And Atik, which means removed. Atik actually means Atik Yemen. It's removed from, and that's a higher state. It's more like the pleasure, you can say. You can say it's the deeper, more abstract, pure desire to have something of art, but you have not yet even spelled out what it may be. So in analyzing a human being, you don't just want to know what your functionality is like, which is your nefesh, ruach, neshama, your conscious functions, but you also want to know what your unconscious forces are like. And that's far more complicated because they're not invisible, because they're not visible, even to yourself. If someone were to ask you, what's your vision statement for your life? Very few people have an answer for that. Their answer will be usually in this category: to be happy, to have the least amount of aggravation, to have money to have all the money I need, to build a happy family. That's most people's answer for what a vision is. And you can understand yourself how shallow that response is. First of all, nothing unique about you. Everybody wants those things that I just said. So immediately means there's nothing about you. It's about the general. Of course, everybody wants to be happy. Secondly, what does happy mean? Do you want happy? Would you be happy if you had all the money in the world? You don't have to go to work and you could stay in bed all day? No worries? Would that be happiness? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no, that would be misery. So even the word happy is a very meaningless word until you define what it means. Because we don't even have an analysis of our conscious faculties, let alone our unconscious ones. So Chai Yechida address those forces of the vision, the force, the hovering force, the makifim of the nefesh. So you have the pnimim of the nefesh and the makifim of the nefesh. And they're both vital in understanding what a human being is like. Now, in Judaism we have 3 prayers every day. We have 4 prayers on Shabbos and holidays. And we have 1 day a year when there's 5 prayers. This corresponds to these 3 dimensions that I just described. Every day in the year we have the capacity to look at and to grow and to refine our conscious faculties. So we have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. These are the 3 prayers of each day. On Shabbos and holidays, there's a door opens up where we're able to access the lower state of unconscious, Chaya, which is Musaf, the additional prayer. And once a year, Yom Kippur, when there's a 5th prayer, Ne'ilah, the one we say right at the end of the day, before the doors close. That special prayer, which is the shortest of all the Yom Kippur prayers, but the most powerful one, is Yechida. That's when all the doors open up, and you're able to access the unconscious of your personality. The spark, where it all began. By going back to where it all began. I remember when giving a class here, and I was speaking about reaching where it all began, spark, and someone after the class came over to me, and he had worked. He was one of the film directors, or assistant director of a very famous movie. It was called 2001. And he was blown away by the discussion because he said he never thought of it that way. 2001 is all about the search for the beginning, for the source. Which is usually, even science fiction and generally, one of some of the more, when they talk the global films or books, is to search the source. Is there life out there? Where did we come from? So when there isn't any religious context, often it takes a shape that human beings go on some type of journey into space. They're going back in time. They're going back to the beginning, where it all began. 2001 has its own particular story. And the end of the film is that the beginning of it all is a baby, is a child. The genesis of all of existence. And it's an abstract movie. It's analyzed so many times, but it's a very powerful one because it talks about that type of going back to the source of it all. Everyone understands science today is looking for the Big Bang. They're looking to be able to recreate the first seconds of creation, as they call it. And lately, with last year, the discovery of Higgs boson, it was trying to discover what the world was like when the first Big Bang took place. And certain particles existed for a split second, and they never came, and then they disappeared. They're trying to go back to the source, because the source tells you everything else starts. If you can know what the source is like, you can know how the rest follows. If we were able to turn the clock back to the moment you and I were born, to the second you were born, before anything in life impacted you, before anything corrupted you, before anything toxified you, before anything distorted your views, what would you be like? And imagine you were able to actually go there and trace the steps and see how you got where you are, and you can fix any parts of the pipeline that were distorted in the process. That would be something, wouldn't it be? Well, Yom Kippur is essentially the day that we're told we can go back to that source. You can't physically go back in time, perhaps, but you go back to the source, because remember, we're talking about a space that is beyond space and time. So you're going back to the psyche, you're going back to the root of where the psyche originates from. That spark. So in Eitz Chaim, in the book of Eitz Chaim, the tree of life from the Arizal, he says that there's a spark, Yechida, that connects with the Yochid, with the oneness of the divine. Yechida liyachdecha, we say in the Yeshainas, in Sukkot. What does this mean? That there's a little spark of a flame that connects to the mother flame, to the top, to the root of it all. And in Yom Kippur, we're able to access it. And when you access it, you can actually open up a channel from there to ourselves, to our conscious lives. The question is how. So there are really two key things to be able to access and, more importantly, channel it in our lives. Two key tools. But as you'll see in a moment, these tools are easier said than done, and much harder to master than one would think. But before I get to the tools, let me just say this. The tools are really not meant to help you find a spaceship that can take you back to the source, the Yechida, the fifth level. They're really tools to help get rid of the things that don't let you get there. Because it's always there. I always quote Michelangelo's statement, I saw the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. So the angel is there, the flower is there, the beauty is there, the spark is there. We have wandered away, and we cannot find the way back. So the methods are not about how do you find this magic, but it's really how do you cut through all the garbage that is blocking you from accessing that magic, that spark. So think of it like a pilot flame, a master flame that's within you, but it's so buried under layers and layers and layers of sediment and experiences, including your own cynicism and skepticism and resignation and all the other fears, inhibitions, and whatever other psychological name you can come up with that doesn't let you access it. So the question is, how do you get from here to there? Not that how to find it; it's how you can get there. There's an expression that we say later, Shmini Atzeres, at the end of the holiday. It says that after 7 days of the holiday, and all these holidays, God says to the Jewish people, now that we're about to part ways, Kosh alai pridaschem. It's difficult for me to see you part from me and go back into your regular lives. So let's take one day, Yom Shmini Atzeres, let's spend one day together. A day of retention, Shmini Atzeres, to retain and spend the day together, just ourselves. The interesting expression there doesn't say Kosh alai pridasenu. It should have said it's difficult, the parting. If you love somebody, and you know that tomorrow they're about to leave, you'll say it's difficult for us, our parting. That's the way you'd say it. Our parting is difficult for me. God says pridaschem. It's difficult for me is your parting. It doesn't say our. Because the parting is only on our end. There's no real parting going on. In our perception, we don't see the connection. Existential loneliness is a result of human beings not sensing the source. Not that it's not there, it's not sensing it. To the point that we convince ourselves it's not there. So I was going to say two things are necessary, but really three things are necessary. The first thing is you have to believe it's there. Because if you've convinced yourself it's not there, and it's really, the whole thing is just made up, or it's an illusion, or inaccessible, then there's nothing to talk about. You're not going to access your own purest sense of self, and your unconscious, going back to the source, if you don't believe it's there. Just not possible. It won't allow itself to even emerge if you don't believe in it. So the first thing is you have to know that we have a source, and that source is available and accessible to you. So what are the two key forces, the two key tools that are necessary to access the source, or to better put, to shed the layers, to strip away the shrouds? These are, one we'll call Kabbalah Sel, and two is called Yegiya. That's in Hebrew. In English, Kabbalah Sel means the ability to go beyond your rational analysis. In broader terms, it really means commitment. Real commitment is never based purely on rational terms. Because if you think about a contractual agreement, for example, as we all know, every contract is, by definition, that's what a contract is, that it has conditions. Number one, you want to have an exit strategy. Number two, you want to be protected. Number three, you don't want to be in bed with someone the rest of your life. So there's conditions. A contract means I am obligated to do this for you if you do this for me. So you promise to do this, I promise to do that, and that's it. That's our relationship. It's conditional commitment. Kabbalah Sale is unconditional commitment. It's the idea that you commit to something not based on what you're going to gain or based on the benefits, the short-term benefits or long-term benefits, but based on a total immersion. It's one of the hardest things for a person to do because it feels like you're out of control. And more importantly, or equally important, is people distinguish Kabbalah Sale as being surrendering to God. Giving up our own faculties and relying on our own resources, and now I'm depending on the crutch called God. Nothing could be farther than the truth in Kabbalah Sale. That's not faith. That's not Kabbalah Sale. That's childish dependencies. The classic story everybody knows, the joke, where the guy, the city is flooding, and everybody's escaping, and one guy calls himself a man of faith, says, I'm not going anywhere, I'm sure God will save me. They have one opportunity, another opportunity, and then the water is filling up the city, everybody's left now. He climbs up to the roof, that's it, it's almost gone. So they send a helicopter for him. They drop a ladder down. He says, no, I'm not going anywhere, God will save me. Then the helicopter comes a second time, then finally a third time, the water is already up to his nose. No, God will save me. Now, of course, God doesn't save him. Comes up to heaven, storms the gates. He says, everybody ran and didn't rely and didn't have the faith in you, didn't rely on you. I'm the only one that had faith, and you didn't save me. So God said, I sent a helicopter 3 times. Faith in Judaism is not some type of blind belief that someone's going to save your life. It's faith in the resources you were given, in the intelligence you were given, in the emotions you were given, that you were given the resources to solve problems. That's also faith. Faith is also embracing the mystery of life, that we don't have it all figured out. And there's something that we'll never fully understand. People of real faith are the strongest people on earth. The people who know that the mind takes you to a door, and then there's a door you can only enter with some type of higher commitment. Falling in love, is this an act of faith? Some call it an act of insanity. But it's definitely not an act of rational. The mind can tell you it's a good idea, but it can't tell you this is absolutely the person for you. Commit the rest of your life to this. So there's an element of allowing ourselves to free ourselves from our own minds and our own rationale and our own rationalizations and calculations. And if you can't do that, you never can access Yechidah. There's just no way. Because that part of our soul is not defined, the calling card to get there is not based on intellect. Intellect can take you to nefesh, ruach, neshama, at best. It can also extrapolate a little to chaya, and realize there's also a vision behind all of this. But the vision of all visions, the source that preceded intellect, cannot be contained by intellect. Intellect is a product of it. Logic is a product of it. When Abraham went to search for God, so first that's what he did. He used his mind and said, through a process of elimination, where is God? It can't be the idols that my father manufactures. That's ridiculous. And then he said, maybe it's nature. Then he realized the sun and moon and every nature is all part of existence. It can't be that either, because they're also part of the same existence. So maybe some invisible force. And then he came to realize this conclusion. He says, I'm searching for it as if I have it all figured out. If I want it to emerge, I have to suspend all my tools and let it just emerge. Because a part cannot dictate the whole. If you're part of a reality, you want to understand all of reality, how could a part dictate the whole? The whole dictates the part. So you realize the mind is a very good tool. So are the emotions, and so is intuition. But all of it together is not enough. You need something all that leads you to a door, and then you realize there's some mystery that's beyond you, and it's not going to be under your control and through your intellect and emotions. So step number 1 in Yechidah is Kabbalah Sale, which is why Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah demand from us so much. They demand total devotion. Yom Kippur especially, a day we strip ourselves as much as possible from all material activity and surround ourselves in the womb, dressed in white, literally as we were born. And we try to connect to that source. We try to completely submit. Because as long as you're bringing your activities, your work, and your aggravations, and your investments Yechida cannot emerge. You need to take everything away and allow that to emerge. The second thing I call Yigia, effort. Effort is the second element that requires work. It's not going to come easily. It requires work. It requires battle, exertion, overcoming all kinds of obstacles, including the inertia and the laziness of the status quo. And I'm going to explain how these two forces are key on a purely intellectual level. Now, the people, each of us is born with a certain type of mind. Some of us are born naturally with good minds. It's a good head. And you can get by with far less exertion and effort than other people who need to work hard at understanding something. Some people, they just grasp things quickly. You tell them something, they right away get it. They have an intuition about them, they have an intelligence. Often, you find people like that become lazy, and they never really reach excellence. Because they've become so spoiled by their own ability to analyze and to comprehend, that they never had to work at it. But the truth is, in comprehending things and understanding things, there's no limit. So how do you get into a deeper comprehension, understanding of a concept? If you're not really getting something. Or to put it perhaps a different way is, how do we create a channel between the unconscious and the conscious? So I've given an example of this in the past. It's a little irreverent example, but I used it from the book Storming Heavens, America's romance with LSD. And when I read it for the first time, I was blown away, because it literally echoed an idea that is said in Eitz Chaim hundreds of years earlier. Essentially, Albert Hoffman, who was the one who discovered, the chemist that discovered this chemical, and this is by no means advocating or in any way endorsing it, was searching for a drug that would simulate madness. Instead, he found his LSD and briefly discovered that it could actually open up channels that you see, a dimension of reality that the naked eye does not see. It heightens the senses, and it allows you to experience something that's like somewhat of the energy within of existence. Now, I know whenever I speak about this, sounds like I took acid. So I want to state as a strong disclaimer, I never did. I never had a taiva, never desired to. But I did learn about this in Chassidus, and I'm able to talk about it with people who are heavy acid takers, and I could hold my own, which just tells you that these truths are there without having ever to experience it personally, by using any alternative substance, meaning you can experience it without the alternative stuff, which means in a healthy way, and without relying on a crutch that you haven't earned, and also able to integrate it in your life and not just go there and come back and see you've seen a nice psychedelic show, but you actually can make it part of your life and part of your responsible life, which goes back to the Kabbalah cell, that you're responsible. This is not about indulging in your own ecstasy, in your own curiosity, or trying to satisfy your need to understand what's behind the wall, behind the doors of perception. So, when I read it for the first time, I realized this is exactly in Eitz Chaim he talks about this. Ayin Beis elaborates on the genome of the unconscious. And the unconscious is exactly that. It's a field of energy that on its own, unfettered and unbridled, would cause anyone to become mad. If your unconscious channels, if the channels to your unconscious suddenly burst open, it would be literally like floodgates bursting open that would drown and flood you completely. It would be impossible to function. The chemicals of our brain, in God's infinite wisdom, are literally that. They're compartments that allow the different experiences each to have their particular compartmentalized place. So when we have pleasure, and there's pain, and then there are things that are very intense, and then the memory fades. If we didn't have that, we would never forget great trauma. So it's important that the mind has forgetfulness. It's important that the mind have limited consciousness, let's put it that way. Because if you were to enter the world of the unconscious, it would be absolutely impossible to contain. Impossible. But there's a channel between the two. The unconscious energy, as I said, that vision is so intense, it has to be able to be channeled. How does it channeled? So it's channeled through the Yechida's unconscious intense energy, channels through Arich, through Yechaya's desire, which is more commensurate to the image. So you have here like this brilliant artist has this surge of energy and wants to create some beautiful vision. That alone is just too powerful and also non-distinguishable, not broken down to details. That in turn channels it into the unconscious, unconscious becomes an unconscious state, which in turn will channel it into the conscious, where he begins to create a piece of art based on those inner underlying forces. People who are born as geniuses or born with these open channels, they naturally have the channels are pretty wide, which is why they say there's a very thin line between madness and genius. Because all you need is a little too much and it's madness. A little less, it's genius. A little much less, it's not genius at all. It's an average mind. So the person who's really on the genius level is tottering between madness and genius all the time. And you see this quite often if you study people of this caliber. But there's ways to open those channels that are not necessarily what you're born with. And one is Kabbalah Sel, and the other is Yegiya. When a person sheds their ego, and instead of seeing this as a narcissistic, a selfish journey into the unconscious, you really see it as, I want to submit and commit to a higher cause, which is God's purpose of it all. Then the Yechida will open its doors, and the channels will be able to flow. If you bring too much of yourself there, that self will be a direct contradiction and will either be hurt or will not get that energy altogether. And the second thing is effort. An example for that would be, Hasidic thought it uses an example. We have, for example, 3 stages of how a flame can be accessed. You have a flame, a little flame, a candle. So you see a flame, it's burning, you can, it illuminates, it can warm things. Then there's a second state, where the flame is concealed in a hot coal. So to the naked eye, if you look at a hot coal, you don't even know it's necessarily hot. It looks covered with white, and if you touch it, you'll find out quickly. But you can't know unless you do something. It's not an apparent flame. As a matter of fact, it may not even heat anything besides anything right in its immediate proximity. But if you fan it, not only do you see the coals turn red, the flame can actually rise. And it can light things, and it can illuminate things. That's the second level of flame. That we'll call the unconscious. The first level is the conscious. Then comes the unconscious. As an example, is a flintstone. A flintstone, if you strike it, can release a spark and can create a flame. But blowing on it or fanning it is not enough. And if you touch it, you won't get burned. You put a coal in water, it'll extinguish the coal. You put a flintstone in water, it retains its ability to create fire. So which is the deepest fire of them all? So in the way you could say, 1 second, the flame, the first level is the most deepest because it's an actual flame, it's burning and so on. Yeah, but first of all, the fuel will run out, will stop burning. Number 2, it's only burning while it's burning. It's not really a source of fire, it's just a source that's burning right now. The coal is a more powerful one because the coal has far greater heat, but it's not as revealed. And the flintstone is the most powerful of all because nothing can extinguish it. And though it's not a flame, but it's the source spark that can come out of it. How do you get the flame inside the coal? You fan it. It takes a little effort, but not a lot. The flintstone needs to be struck. You have to strike it hard. So this is the example given, that if you want to access the unconscious energies, you need to have to do 2 things. You need to have a certain type of accepting the yoke, commitment, devotion that is beyond you. And the second thing is you need effort, whether it's fanning it. And if you want to reach the unconscious, you need a lot more Kabbalah Sel, a lot more commitment, and a lot more exertion. So a good mind that wants to reach into the unconscious and get beyond just its natural ability to comprehend things requires real struggle. And these are the two things that we so actually abhor. We don't like to be accepting an authority beyond ourselves. And two, we don't like to exert ourselves unless it's necessary. But that's exactly what Rosh Hashanah and even more so Yom Kippur come to teach us. They are basically forces that help us enforce and that help us reach a place beyond your own ego, and to a place of exertion. You know, my whole life I grew up with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, obviously, as many traditional Jews did. And it's always an awesome day because simply the psychology of it is such. You grow up, it's so intense. Your parents, the day before, it's like a whole thing. But the skeptic that I am, and sometimes cynic as well, as I became a teenager, I started wondering what this whole thing is. This some type of like intense programming? But then I saw some real Hasidim praying on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Not many, but a few. And I saw that with the real thing. Most I met were lip service and just did it by cultural. It was a cultural thing, a powerful cultural thing, and I'm not dismissing its value. But I saw a few people who are real and experienced it in a real way. I saw someone davening Rosh Hashanah without a minyan, didn't even know the minyan ended. 7 hours under a talus. And he was not sleeping. And I saw kind of how his face was glowing afterwards. And I realized as a person who's working on himself, a person who's sitting there and gives it a lot of thought. He's not doing it automatically. No one does that automatically. It was a real effort of digging into the deepest parts and recesses of his soul to access that unconscious state. So there is real work involved, which unfortunately most of us were not taught. You know, we're taught Rosh Hashanah and Kippur are very special days, awesome days, the day God writes and seals you in the book of life. You better get your act together. You know, we all got a little superstition, so we think if I don't do the right things. You ever see baseball players? This one has this one, that's when they do all kinds of stupid machinations because if they don't do certain things, they think they're going to strike out or they're not going to hit. So all human beings have their superstitions. I don't do certain thing Rosh Hashanah, that's it. Who knows what's going to happen? But there's also great beauty, of course, in it and power in it. But then there's a thing about Rosh Hashanah and Kippur which they should have taught us, and that is how it helps you access the source, your source, the deepest part of who you really are, where you came from. That is not really taught. And particularly Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah we did already. Yom Kippur, the fifth prayer, takes you on a journey through all the 4 levels of the soul and then into the 5th. And it literally is exactly that, a journey. But every journey comes with a price. There's no such thing as a free ride. The price is the Kabbalah sale and the Yagiyah. The price is that you have to be ready to shed yourself and your ego and allow something new to happen. And 2, that you are ready to work at it and not going to take anything for granted. So that's the good news and the bad news, if you want to call it that. I don't call it bad news, it's all good news. Because then it's a trip worthy of taking. You always hear, and I see people have no problem when they go to workshops, how to open up creative channels, how to be a better writer, a better musician, a better lover, a better businessman. There's no problem when the person leading the workshop gets you out of your comfort zone. That's what they want to do. They want to get you out of your comfort zone. Everybody loves it. Why? Because what you're going to gain, I'm going to become a better whatever I want to be better at. And they use all kinds of methods, and people are rave about, I learned how to get out of my comfort zone. As a result, I learned to open up new channels of creativity. When it comes to applying this to anything that has a somewhat religious connotation, the whole thing is terrifying. Now, I know why, of course, the obvious reason, because religion was never presented as opening up channels. Religion is all about constricting people. Don't do this, don't do that, mind control. You behave like this, God's going to do this, God's going to do that. I'm trying to say is that the first thing we have to shed is these stereotypes, because it's absolutely not true. And I don't care if there are millions of people out there that are religious fanatics and brainless and empty in that sense. It makes no difference. That's not the Torah and Judaism that is real. And I'm not saying this is my new ideas. You can look it up yourself. These ideas of Yechida, this fifth level, is not some concept I came with now in 2012, Tafshinai Gimel. These are rooted in sources that just never taught us, and never taught us in a way that we can relate to it. It's the ultimate opening up of channels. So why should it be disturbing to know that, yes, you got to pay a price, and the price is you got to get out of your comfort zone. Simple as that. Every workshop, no matter what it is. Look at any athlete. I just met a family. They brought their daughter. They're giving their daughter tennis lessons at 6 years old and ski lessons. And I asked her, "How is it difficult?" She said, "I hate it." But she does it because she got no choice. She gets her rewards for it. And I said to parents, "Why would you do something that she hates so much?" They say, "Because the rewards are there. She's going to be excellent later." And I say the same thing. I say, "What about her soul or Judaism?" "Oh, come on. What excellence?" They don't see excellence associated. They see guilt. We'll do it for grandma or grandpa. We'll do it for God. Let's create we'll be on God's good side. It's associated with everything that has nothing to do with human actualization, with self-actualization. But I want to add one key thing, one key difference, which makes Yom Kippur far greater than any workshop to any creative channels you'll ever go to. See, there, it's all about self-actualization. You'll become a better writer. You'll become a better athlete. You'll become a better lover. You'll become a better, whatever it is, business person. The you will become a bigger you, a better you. And Yom Kippur, the reward is far greater. It's not about you. Is that you will discover the real root of yourself, and you'll find out it's not you, that's your own source. So one makes you a bigger yesh, which is also why people like it, because it makes more, I'm going to get more of me. Hey, that I'm ready to pay a price for. You're going to tell me I'm not going to get more of myself, that I'm not ready to pay a price for. But you know what you're going to get? You're going to get not only more of yourself, you're going to get your real self. So instead of thinking, get more of yourself, think of it, do you want the real you, or you want more of the you that perceived you? That's the question. And Yom Kippur is the real you. And the fascinating thing is that when you recognize that source, you don't become less. It's not a diminishment of your you. It's the real you. And you find out that you is not defined by ego. That you is not defined simply by your narrow, myopic view of what you think is valuable. That is the ultimate reward. It's real, true reality. And that itself tells you why you need those two tools. Because if you're not ready with the Kabbalah self to go out of yourself, how could you get that? And if you're not ready to exert, which forces you to strike the rock to get the deeper sparks, how else are you going to get there? If you keep doing what you did, you'll get what you had. You do a little more, you'll have a little more of what you had. Maybe you have a perfect of what you had, but it's still going to be what you had. To get back to the true source, which is far beyond anything you've ever had, you have to be ready and have the courage and the audacity and dare to challenge yourself in that way. And that's what a real Ovid, a real person who sat under a talis or Shon Yom Kippur was able to do. I recently heard a story of this chassid, his name was Rabbi Nissen Nemenov. And he was arrested in Russia, he was sent off to Siberia. And they finally released him, but as those anti-Semites did, they released him the day before Yom Kippur, somewhere in some cold Arctic Siberian town. And they let his family know. By the time his family came, it was already a day after Yom Kippur. The family comes. They look. They know what town he was released in. They come. They ask, "Did anybody see a Jew with a beard?" They say, "Yeah, there's some crazy Jew down by the edge of the town, small town, in the bar there." They go into the bar. They don't see anyone. They say, "Is anyone here that's like strange?" They say, "Yeah, he's in the back." They go to the back in the corner. We're talking now 24 hours after Yom Kippur. So it's like a day after the afternoon after Yom Kippur. And they see Nissen standing with a talis over his head, standing as if oblivious, and he's davening. Day after Yom Kippur. And they see on the table near him, they see 2 bottles of beer. So they understood immediately what happened. He was released. He realizes Yom Kippur is coming. The mitzvah is you have to have 2 meals before, at least. So he's not going to go eat any food there. There was nothing kosher. So he bought 2 bottles of beer. One was the first meal. The second was the second meal. Then he stood and davening for the last almost 48 hours. Tell me, what is that? No one's watching. He's not getting points. There's no one around. This is a Jew who worked on himself and was connecting to his source. They tell a similar story with a chassid who, there's a song called Anim Zmiris, that they heard him singing it because they came in Kippur. Everybody runs home after shul, right? After davening and the evening service. This fast is over. You got to get home to eat. It's also a mitzvah to eat. In case you need the mitzvah. It's not just because you're hungry. And one Jew didn't go. In the morning, they come to daven in the morning. People come a little later, the day after Yom Kippur. Because then we're absolved of all sins. And this guy is still in his kittel, in his white garment, and his talis, this chassid. And he's circling a bima, and he's dancing, singing a song. Very beautiful song. These are people who knew the secret of being real. They knew the secret of going into the deepest recesses of the soul, and not because they were culturally trained to do so. No one does this out of programming. When you program, you know what a program is like. The program is when the program is over, you go home. You can't wait to go home. These are people who forgot that there is a home. Or they realize where their real home is. And you have stories like this that of real people. Unfortunately, we don't have many. But this is what a real Yom Kippur experience is like. And this is the journey into the inner genome of the spiritual DNA of the psyche and the soul. Now, this doesn't mean it's not alive and kicking throughout the year, but Yom Kippur is a day when you actually have the ability, because certain doors open, certain layers are shed. It makes it easier. Now, what about people like ourselves? Can we expect to suddenly be found davening 24 hours after Yom Kippur? I wish that my words have such impact on somebody that they won't even realize the fast is over. That's how intense their experience will be. But if you haven't reached that level yet, let's put it this way. Knowing what's required is already the beginning of the journey. They say, have the cure. Awareness is have the cure of a problem. To understand what Yom Kippur really is about, to understand what traveling into what your soul is really about, what you're really about, even if you're not yet ready, or you don't have all the tools, and have not really been trained, but you already have a beginning, you know what the goal is. And that alone is already an epiphany, an awakening. Because it allows you to think big. It allows you to think bigger than you've ever thought. We have within us an unbelievable, infinite, and unfathomable resource, reservoir. It's called the Yechida of your soul. You don't know it. You probably have never seen it. It's the driving force of who you are. What you know of is maybe the outer levels of the conscious faculties. Even that questions how aware we are of our conscious faculties. Your chachma, your bina, your das, your chesed, gvura. We never even did that diagnosis. So imagine what you don't know. Even the conscious things we're not fully aware of, our potential. But you have this flame that's in there like a spark inside of a flintstone. And accessing it can change your entire life. Because accessing gives you the purpose of your life. It gives you drive. It gives you passion. It gives you everything that makes us what we really are. It gives us the dignity of being a human being. Not driven by materialism, not driven by instant gratification, not driven by immediate needs, driven by higher purpose. But you have a whole slew, an arsenal of forces that fight against this message every second. So Yechida is like a little child hidden in a dungeon, deep inside the essence of your soul. And the rest of you is in control. You're doing this with your life. I'm making money, I'm business, I'm showing off. I have anger, I have vengeance, I have plans, I have passions, I have desires. And you got yourself a whole game that you're playing with all the masks you wear, and that's what dominates your life. And Kippur asks us one day, think about the real you. Completely not what you think it is. Everything you know about yourself is false. It's not false in the sense that it's an illusion. It's meaning it's superficial. It's not anything what you really are about. So of course, to really appreciate this and get to the essence of it requires work. It requires effort. It requires a lot of exertion, and it requires that Kabbalah cell. But the key is to know each of us can do it. How much we'll do it during the next few days depends on how much you prepare for it. If you set your mind to it and you're ready to work at it, trust me, the reward will be commensurate to the effort. Yigaitim atzasi. Because it says, someone who says, I've toiled and have not found, don't believe them. They say they have found and haven't toiled, haven't exerted themselves, don't believe them. Yigaitim atzasi taimin. Someone says, I've toiled, I've struggled, and I've found the reward, then you can believe them. So not just rationally, but even faith does not accept that if you don't toil, you're going to find something. So it all comes down to what we invest, how much we invest. I speak to you, I speak to myself equally. We all have two identities. The identity that the masks we wear, the investments and activities we're involved in. And then there's the you that, as I said, is rarely shows its face. But everybody knows that there are magical moments in our lives. There are moments when you may fall in love, when something special happens, when you just get a sense of truth, when you begin crying for no apparent reason. You just sense something is greater than you are. You sense there's a deeper reality. That's a small little taste of chaya, probably. Usually not yechida. But yechida has that impact on Yom Kippur than everyone. We have, even in baseball, this great shrine of America. So you have this whole history of Sandy Koufax, Hank Greenberg, and all kinds of superstars, but who just chose not to play in Yom Kippur. So I don't know about this. Hank Greenberg, I think it was 1934. So he chose not to pitch on Yom Kippur. It was a World Series game probably. And he came to his synagogue and they gave him a standing ovation, which of course embarrassed the rabbi because the rabbi never got a standing ovation. Now, you could dismiss it and say, okay, these Jews, Yom Kippur, they try to... But the question is why? Why Yom Kippur? Secular Jews who don't have any relationship with Judaism any other time of the year. Yom Kippur is still on the map. It's still known. Most Jews know about Yom Kippur. And the synagogues fill up. So one reason is because the unconscious spark gets closer to its flame, it senses unconsciously that something is happening. And despite of all the layers and all people's experiences, there's something that awakens. The challenge, of course, is to hold on to it, to maintain it. It's not that easy. But something is there, and you could see it in Jewish world today, with all the assimilation. Yom Kippur still has. I met a guy, his name was Hal Linden. He was a writer, he was a copywriter for an advertising agency, and he was the main copywriter of two major campaigns. One was seatbelts save lives, and smoking kills. The anti-smoking and the seatbelt, which were very much billions of dollars went to those campaigns because both those things were things that people just would not refuse to accept. It was a whole process of saturation of he came to realize, but listen to this. He came to realize, I said, so how did you get to the campaign? He says, listen, riding a seatbelt was for nerds who wore a seatbelt. If you were cool, you didn't wear a seatbelt, and everybody smoked. You look at that period in time, smoking was cool as well. How do you change the mentality of millions and millions of people being fed by advertisers and so on? So he said he looked for the most primal thing that people are searching for, and he found it in Yom Kippur. He is completely secular. He knew nothing about Judaism. The only thing he did was fast on Yom Kippur. He didn't even know why. He said, my father would fast, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they all fasted Yom Kippur. And he realized, what is this thing about Yom Kippur? So he says there's sometimes a spark that remains hidden, that is completely dormant, but something remains, something. He was looking, what is that spark that will get people to stop smoking? He said the spark is everybody wants to live. And hence they came up with a line, smoking kills, as blunt as possible. The only thing that can fight that tendency, that coolness, that type of conformity everybody was smoking, was telling them that it kills. And seatbelts save lives, the same idea. And they backed it up with data, and it took years and years of saturating, and then finally the government, stopping smoking advertisements on television, etc., etc. And then they began to fine and raise the taxes. I mean, it was all part of the campaign. But there's a primal force in each of us that usually doesn't emerge until you're really under deep pressure. Like the Flintstone. Deep pressure. A lot of pressure, exertion. You strike the stone and the spark comes out. How many sparks like that do we have inside of us? But they will not emerge unless there's some serious pressure. Now, you can wait for someone else to pressure you, or God forbid, pressure that we don't, unwanted pressure, or you can pressure yourself and squeeze yourself out of your comfort zone and allow those sparks to fly. That's the opportunity we have. And there are many sparks where that comes from. It's a question of accessing that deeper part of our yechidah. So in the human genome, we've mapped out the conscious faculties, and now the two unconscious ones, the unconscious and the unconscious. If you think it stops there, it doesn't. It goes deeper, because remember, there's un, and so on. But suffice it to say, that's pretty good if we can get the picture of this. And also the channels that channel the energies, the forces that flow from the unconscious to the unconscious to the conscious into our daily lives. Now think about where we stand. Where we stand is we're on a very surface level, conscious level. I would say superficial consciousness is what most of us experience. Once in a while, we have a little deeper consciousness. And rarely do we have awareness of our unconscious, and very rare of our unconscious. So tell me, where does that put us in the percentile of how much we know of ourselves? Is it 1%? Is it 0.5%? Is it 0.0001%? It's not meant to belittle or to say we know so little. It's meant to say how much you have to go for, how much potential you have. So don't ever think that you are a diminished individual. You have unbelievable resources, and we know so little about ourselves. Maybe you should write yourself a letter before Yom Kippur that says, I want to get to know myself. Write yourself, dear me, or dear whatever you want to call yourself. But try to use a no expletive. Dear something, dear something, and write yourself a letter that I'd like to get to know myself. And write through a process of elimination. I know that I'm not my job. I know I'm not my money. I know I'm not my food. I know I'm not the other things that I entertain myself with. So what am I? And maybe by writing to yourself this way, you can begin to discover a part of yourself. And Yom Kippur will come. Yom Kippur may respond. The essence of the day itself heals and give you ability to actually find that inner side of yourself. And with that, I want to wish everybody a true Yom Kippur journey into the, what is it? He said, 30,000 leagues under the sea. Journey to the center of the earth. The journey to the center of your soul. We'll call that Yom Kippur. And it requires you, obviously, shedding the layers and accepting the commitment to something deeper, and the exertion that it requires, the effort, the long, short road. God should bless us regardless with a very healthy year, a year of Boneh Chayim Mezeinu Revicha, health for ourselves and our families and our children, and abundance in parnasa and livelihood, and physical health and spiritual health, and life, and everything that our heart desires, healthy ways, and love, a year of love and a year of compassion and harmony. And God should bless us that this Yom Kippur should be a Yom Kippur that also brings us redemption, personal and global redemption. Thank you. Now, Philip, you'll be giving your class tomorrow night? Yes, Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. If you have not left your email address, please do so. I speak to everyone, whether it's those here or those in cyberspace. Next week we will not have a class because it's Yom Kippur actually. It's Wednesday. So around this time, it will be around a little after Neil. The Yom Kippur should be ending. No, now it's over already. Unless some of you are going to stay in shul and just keep davening until somebody comes and wakes you up. Let's see if that happens. And then, great, have a very good Yom Kippur. And then, the following week we also will not have a class. But I may do it online only. Online I may record something. The following week will be Sukkot, but I will be out of town. But we will keep you posted, especially by email. So please check your emails about the coming schedule for the next few weeks until the season is over, the holiday season is over. Everyone have a very good Yom Kippur and then a very good Sukkot. It should be a very blessed year in every possible way.